So I've never been to school for woodworking, although I'd love to. I think that'd be awesome. But essentially what I'm saying is that everything I do know about woodworking, I've learned from working in this shop. So along the way, I've had three mentors in this shop. There's my boss, Eric, there's Rick, and then there's Brian. And in one way or another, they've all shepherded me along the way to becoming a better craftsman and a better woodworker. I've been thinking a lot about the differences between teachers and mentors recently, and I think what's so special about a mentorship is that both parties have something at stake. My mentors know so much more than I do about this craft, and they're a wealth of information, and that's what I get out of it. And they are invested in my progress and development as a woodworker. And in that way, there's this give and take. The other thing about mentorship is, at least in my case, it seems to last forever. Like, I'm still in touch with all my mentors because I'm still a woodworker and they're still woodworkers. And so they're witnesses to my development and to my progress. And that's really special too. So a good amount of the woodworkers I know have been to school for woodworking or furniture design, and typically in those programs, like the Center for Furniture Craftsmanship in Maine or the Krenov School in Northern California, they might have you building a cabinet to demonstrate your abilities as a woodworker. But it's not necessarily the type of cabinet that you're thinking of. So cabinet making involves a combination of beginner to advanced woodworking techniques. And I think a lot of programs utilize a cabinet build as a teaching device because not only will the student learn new woodworking skills, but they'll also be thrust into the deep end on things like design, proportions, material choice, finishing options, and ultimately the cabinet's purpose. There's a lot to consider in a build like this. So my plan for this video is to essentially take myself to school. I'm going to design and build one of these cabinets as a way of continuing my education. For this build, I'll be choosing joinery and designs that lean on hand tools and traditional woodworking practices, but that doesn't mean that I won't be using any power tools. I'll still be using power tools and machines along the way, but the idea or the goal is to create all of my own joinery and not rely on floating tenons or the domino. And I'm gonna dedicate this project to my mentors because although I never went to school for woodworking, I do still have these teachers who continue to invest in my development and learning as a furniture maker. As far as materials for the cabinet goes, I am gonna be making it entirely out of ash. I don't get to work with ash all that regularly at the shop, and so I think it'll be a nice change of pace. The thing about ash that I'm trying to avoid is that when it gets oiled, it really tends to have this very yellow quality about it, and so I'm gonna mitigate that by bleaching the cabinet. I'm gonna give the cabinet a curved front, which means that the doors will have to be shaped entirely by hand. And then I'm gonna bring the cabinet together with hand-cut dovetails, which I've never done before. I'm also gonna add 6 equal sized drawers at the bottom of the case, and then top it all off with a Kumiko pattern in the back panel. Oh, and it'll have 2 adjustable shelves. So there's this Japanese technique of woodworking called Kumiko. It's a traditional form of woodworking using small pieces of wood, basswood in this case, to create intricate patterns. I want the back panel of the cabinet to feature one of these designs, and so I got started on that process. If you're interested in seeing the step-by-step process of making this particular Kumiko pattern, you can view it on my Patreon. I have tool videos and monthly Q&As that I upload there. Patreon is a big part of what makes these videos possible, so please consider supporting my work by becoming a patron. I topped it all off by gluing shoji paper to the back of the panel. I plan on adding lights behind the cabinet, and the shoji paper will help to give the Kumiko a nice glow. I made a template for the exact radius I want for the cabinet front, and then I asked Eric to help cut it out on the CNC since they'll need to be exact mirror images. I got started by milling up all my sides for the cabinet. This is my typical milling process of bucking up material, ripping it to a rough width on the bandsaw, and then jointing and planing before ripping it again on the table saw for glue-ups. I won't be showing any milling again in the video, but know that any material I work with moving forward went through this process. After I had all of my sides glued up, I routed the cabinet top to the template, and then routed the bottom of the cabinet to the top of the cabinet, if that makes sense. Now that my sides are all cut to size, I can get started on the joinery. So I've never made hand-cut dovetails before and was having a tough time making sense of the process in my head. I made a few test pieces to get comfortable, just these little coffee pour-overs that I made for the house, and landed on an angle and sizing I liked for the dovetails. I removed a majority of the meat with a dovetail saw and coping saw, and then went back in with chisels to get the final shape. At this point, I just transferred my lines over to my pin boards and got going on those as well. The whole process took a few evenings to finish, but I was really happy with the way it all came out. I left about a 1/16 overhang to be flushed up after the cabinet was glued up and assembled. My plan is to have 6 evenly sized drawers at the bottom of the case, and I'll be styling it after a piece that Eric made that was a set of wall hanging drawers. I'm essentially going to copy the bullnose dividers and the shelf shape. Hopefully in this way I can pay homage to the impact Eric has had on my education by instilling an element of his own design. I used a router to shape the 3/8 dados for the shelves and the dividers. I then cut the shelf rabbets using the cabinet saw, establishing my shoulders first and then removing the rest of the meat. I resawed some material that I liked for the dividers and then gave them a bullnose on the router table. Since there are going to be 2 adjustable shelves, I had to drill for the brass shelf pins that I'll be using later on. The cabinet is going to be wall mounted, and for that reason, I decided on a plywood back rather than a traditional frame and panel, since I'll be attaching a French cleat to it. At first I thought I might use a rabbiting bit for the back panel after the carcass was glued up, and then chisel out square corners. The issue being that I couldn't just run a full rabbet down the length of my sides because the cut would be exposed through the dovetails. But then I learned about this technique using the table saw where you can raise and lower the blade with set stops so as not to expose the cut through the joinery. This way I could repeat my cut depth and safely start my cut as I slowly raise the blade into my piece. I'm going to be using Brusso knife hinges for the doors, and I'll need to make the mortises in the cabinet body before it gets assembled. Now that I had tackled the rabbet, I was ready to bleach and poly the internals and then glue up the carcass. I'm going to be doing the glue up in 2 parts since the dividers and shelves can all slide into position while the piece is together. Ultimately, this style of joinery wasn't effective for the shelves. There isn't enough strength side to side, and so I was getting a 30-second gap once I took the clamps off. So I decided to secure the joint afterwards with epoxy and brass pins. Similarly, I added walnut pins to secure the dovetail transition in the front. I worried that over time the front of the joint would separate, and so I added these walnut pins to ensure a lasting joint. The next and possibly most daunting part of this entire build is getting the doors shaped. Using SketchUp, I extrapolated the radius of the cabinet into a full circle and then found the angle for cutting my door staves, similar to how you would make a coopered barrel. I used a typical flat smoothing plane to shape the convex side of the doors. And then a curved sole spoke shave to shape the concave interior side of the doors. I really underestimated how long this project was going to take and also how long the hand tool portion of this process would take. I can feel myself mentally moving on from this project. I'm getting that antsy feeling. I'm just ready for the next thing. But learning takes time, and if I'm going to hone these skills, I might as well take the time and enjoy the process. So I'm not going to add unnecessary urgency to this build. And ultimately, the only reason these practices exist is because someone took the time to learn them and because someone took the time to teach them. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do for door handles, but I knew I wanted to incorporate cane somehow into the design. I lucked out and got something I was pretty happy with after a quick prototype. I soaked the cane in some water and then wrapped the handles. This allows the cane to become more pliable, and then it'll tighten and hold shape once it dries. Everything got bleached and polyed except for the drawers and door handles. I gave those a boiled linseed oil finish because I thought the contrast would be really nice. Between the build and editing for this video, this project will have taken me the better part of a year to finish. Something that I've just been thinking on repeat throughout this entire process is time is running out. There isn't enough time. Time is being taken away from me. And ultimately, I just think that's kind of a twisted way of looking at things. Because I think if you're really being present, and woodworking forces you to be present, you know, all crafts and art forms force you to be present, then I think there's more of this thing about time giving you skills, time giving you knowledge, time is a gift. And I just think that's a way better way of looking at it, as opposed to this thing that takes away from you and runs out. The wonderful thing about woodworking and other crafts is that there's always more to learn. And the more I learn, the more I become aware that I don't know. You can always refine your skills, study new techniques, and go further on down the woodworking rabbit hole, and someone will always be more knowledgeable than you, hopefully inspiring you to keep learning. And if you're lucky like I am, then hopefully the people who are wiser than you, smarter than you, will share their knowledge and share their time. And maybe that's the greatest gift of all, is someone willing to share their time with you in the pursuit of mastery.